All right, everybody. This is Kory Woods, your Detroit Pistons and Detroit Lions beat reporter with MLive. I have a special guest for today's interview. We have the one and only from FS1's, Chris Broussard. Sir, thank you for taking your time to speak with me today.
It's great to be on, man. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And right now, talk about Detroit Pistons. There's a lot of things going on with the franchise, as we know. But before we get into some of that stuff, just from your time covering the league, the people you know, the things that you've heard, what is the current perception of the Detroit Pistons around the league right now?
It's bad. I mean, it's terrible. The perception is that they're not well run, and that it's a shame because the Pistons had been one of the greatest franchises in the league. Obviously Isiah Thomas built them into a great team with his play, with the first couple of championships with Joe Dumars and the Bad Boys and all that. And then Dumars, became their president and rebuilt, the championship culture and team. And obviously they won a championship. And then since that team has kind of, went away, it's just been downhill ever since. And it's kind of a shame because, like I said, for a long time, the Pistons were one of the top teams you thought about when you thought about the NBA. I mean, obviously the Lakers and Celtics and Bulls with Jordan and the Sixers and the Spurs with Duncan. But the Pistons were certainly a top 10 team, 10 franchise when you thought about the NBA for a long time. And now they're essentially completely off the radar.
And yeah, you did just mention something about them being a poorly ran. They just went ahead and made a new hire. Trajan Langdon got him from the New Orleans Pelicans. He's now going to be the new president of basketball operations. And during their introductory press conference, we heard some different things about the franchise that Langdon plans to do. One of them is he plans to take one bad contract as long as they're attached with some young assets. And they're going to be roughly working with around 60 million, give or take, this free agency. Just in your opinion, what do you think is going to be the quickest way for them to turn this around under Langdon? And what is your impression of the hire?
Well, look, I like Trajan. He's got experience. He's worked with several franchises and been, learned under some good GMs. And so I think he'll do a good job. You never know until they get in there. I thought Troy Weaver was a good hire at the time, and it just didn't work out for Troy. But I do think Trajan is, like I said, will do a good job or was a good hire. I think he can create a culture, which is one of the first things. You have to create a great culture. I remember when LeBron James was in Cleveland, his first go-round, and it was, I don't know if it was the year he was going to be a free agent, that season prior to that summer where he'd be a free agent, or maybe the year before. But either way, we were talking about it, and he mentioned to me that, if I remember correctly, it was like he said there are only like 6 franchises that have won championships recently. And he named them. Obviously, you had the Lakers, you had the Heat with Dwayne Wade that in 2006. He mentioned a few of the franchises, and what he was saying is that championship culture is important. And he was looking at a team that had that type of culture. And so, of course, he ended up going to Miami, and they did have a championship culture, and he won some rings there. So that is what is important. That's the first step they need to build. And obviously, their coaching hire will have a lot to do with that. And we'll see who Trajan ends up going with. Obviously, he's got a history with James Borrego back in New Orleans. And some of the other candidates, Micah Nori and a few others, have some connection to the Pistons. So we'll see what he does there. But, then it's about building your culture and then getting players that can be good. Now, look, the interesting thing is I do think they have some young talent. Obviously Cade Cunningham, who's going to be extended. I think he's a great talent. And then Jaden Ivey is good. You got Isiah Thompson, but those three guys I mentioned, they're three perimeter guys. Right now, the challenge, or one of the challenges, is that they can't shoot. Like, this is a 3-point shooting league now, and you've got three perimeter guys that really can't shoot, for the most part. They're not good outside shooters. So they have to figure something out. And I think, obviously, they're building around Cade, and you got to get some shooting to put around him. And those are some of the things they need to build on.
You said a couple of things that I want to get at one by one, but the first one I'm going to start with is with Cade Cunningham. Obviously, he's up for the rookie extension, but there's an expectation that he's going to get it. He talked about it at the exit interview. Now, and I want to get your opinion is there are some local media here that believe that the Pistons should go ahead and move on from Cade Cunningham. I've seen a trade floating, like send him to the San Antonio Spurs for Keldon Johnson and some draft picks. What are your thoughts about the idea of the Pistons moving on from a talent like Cade Cunningham? Because, I mean, last season, he was one of like 7 players to average, even though it was on a bad team, he was one of 7 players to average at least 20 points and 7 assists per game. What do you think about them moving on from him too early?
Well, I like Cade a lot. And I've heard the rumors or the talk, at least, about San Antonio. And I gotta keep it real with you. I'd love to see him in San Antonio. With Victor Wembanyama, oh my gosh, it would be, because I think Wembanyama is incredible and has GOAT potential. Not that we'll see if he fulfills it, but I think that's his potential. And to get a guy like Cade in a great organization, good culture, with a great coach like Greg Popovich, that would be tremendous. And if you're now, here's the thing you have to think about if you're the Pistons. I understand the sentiment, even though those players that you're talking about from San Antonio aren't as good as Cade. The sentiment is that we could get some draft picks as well. Not going to be great ones, because I think the Spurs with Cade and Wembanyama would be a pretty good team. But, you really kind of push the clock back. And Trajan and a new coach, if you were to do something like that, it just makes it a full-on rebuild. And the fans are patient. The ownership is a little more patient because they understand we're starting over. Whereas so that can be favorable for the front office and the coaching staff, because it's like it lowers expectations. If you pay Cade the max, then even though the team is still young and still building, the patience is not as much as it would be. And you're like, okay, we just signed a guy to a max deal who's now, what would he be in his 4th year, I think? We're starting expecting them to do a little winning, which they're not really ready to do. So I can understand both viewpoints. One thing I'd say, though, is if you trade Cade and you get some draft picks for him, guess what you're looking to do with those picks or with some other trades? Get another Cade Cunningham.
Yeah.
So when you have one in the building, you typically want to keep them. And again, I think he's not a great shooter, but he can do pretty much everything else. And one thing, if I'm Trajan, I am talking to all 3 of those guys, and I'm just like, shoot in the offseason. You have got to improve your 3-point shooting if you're a perimeter guy in this league. So I'm focusing on that, but I'm also, if I do re-sign Cade, I'm going to try to put some shooters around him.
That's a good point you made right there, and I think Trajan probably seen that as well. That's why they I know they brought in Fred Vincent from the Pelicans as well. He's been regarded as a shooting
Yep.
specialist, so maybe
Yep.
that could lead to that as well. But about their free agency again, they have the roughly the 60 million plus they'll be working with. As far as trying to add solid players or all-star level of talent, do you think it's more realistic for them to find that through a free agency or through going through trades? Because historically, the Pistons have reloaded their team better through trade as opposed to signing big name free agents.
Yeah, because Detroit isn't, as a city, is not a destination place, even though they've had a great history with the Pistons. Let's just face it, it's not a great free agent market. And veteran free agents who can really play, star level guys who are looking to win, they're not going to go to the Pistons. So I just think it's unquestionably more realistic to rebuild this team through trades. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I think maybe a lot of this first year, or certainly the offseason, but probably even this year, for this new regime, it's going to be about finding out who's a keeper, which of these young players will be a part of our nucleus going forward, and kind of determine, like I said, building the culture and figuring out what type of players you want to have going forward and which of these guys are keepers, because they're all good. Like Jaden is really talented, and obviously Cade is, and so is Asur. But can they all play together effectively is a question that has to be answered too.
Now, obviously, the Pistons would probably want to keep on to a guy like Cade if you're trying to, rebuild or try to turn around this franchise. But some of those other pieces, do you think it's smart to probably move on from a guy like an Asar or Jaden Ivey, some guys, like you just said, that have had some shooting struggles, but if you package them in a trade, that you could probably land one of those solid players or all-star caliber players?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it. If you're the Pistons, everything is on the table, including Cade. Not that I'd want to trade him, but I'm open to anything. All right, that helps our franchise. So I would certainly like to, I'm sure the new coach, whoever that ends up being in Trajan, I'm sure they're devouring the film and figuring out, because they have to figure out a system that either these guys can play in and excel, or begin moving on from some of these guys. And you just can't have three non-shooters on your perimeter. I mean, you look at Ja Morant, he's not a great three-point shooter. He's improved, but they got shooters around. Desmond Bane was a shooter. They had shooters around him. So they're going to have to get some shooters. I like Jaden a lot. But I would, if I'm the Pistons, I'm listening to everything. And again, first they got to get a coach in, start building their culture, and determine how they want to play, or what, really it's about playing to the strengths of your team. Like they should not, if this is their team going forward, at least this year, you can't have a 3-point gunning team because these guys don't shoot it well from three unless there's big improvement over the summer. And so I think the best coaches are ones that fit their style of play and their system to the talent that they have, not coaches that try to, force a team to play one certain way, even if they don't have the ability to do it. So they got to obviously get a coach and start building this culture before they can fully determine which way they're going with the players.
And you just mentioned about the coach. They have to now go search for a new coach. Obviously, we knew that. I don't say obviously, but there was an expectation that they couldn't move on from Troy Weaver as general manager, 74 and 244 over the past 4 seasons. But to sign Monty Williams to a historic 6-year, $78.5 million contract and then part ways with him after one season and eat that 65 million, what was your shock level of them dismissing Monty?
Oh, my shock level was high. I mean, I thought that contract would keep him from being fired. I really did. And I think Monty's a very good coach. It just didn't work out. And I think he's now more like better for veterans. Like I actually thought the Lakers should have strongly considered him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard a lot of talk about, if they had been 2 or 3 weeks before that, they would have that's hogwash. I mean, they hadn't hired Redick yet. And so they should have done their due diligence with Monty. He had a great relationship with Anthony Davis when they were in New Orleans. So I think Monty is still a very good coach. It just wasn't a good situation for him there in Detroit. It wasn't a great fit. But I was shocked because I thought with that much money, that they would, at least keep him at least one more year, and see. But whenever you bring in a new front office, they tend to want to bring in their own guy as coach, and so that that part of it wasn't that surprising, but the money really made it a shock.
A couple of names you mentioned earlier that are being linked to this job. James Borrego, now he's being linked to it. Now that the Cavaliers have went ahead and hired Kenny Atkinson, Michael Norrie, Sean Sweeney from Dallas, J.B. Bickerstaff. Of that group, who do you think, in your opinion, could possibly land this job, or is there going to be some outside candidates that could probably sneak in? I know they said that they're going to open up the search according to some other reporters out there. Who is there? Anybody else who would you like to see possibly get an interview, like a Chris Quinn or a Sam Cassell, maybe added to that list?
Well, those are two good names. I was going to say Sam Cassell. One of the guys that, for whatever reason, is persona non grata in head coaching circles is Mark Jackson. But when you look at what he did with Golden State, instilling a culture, a defensive mentality, and helping two young guards and Steph and Clay develop and become what they did. Now, they're very different from Cade and Jayden, but he would be someone I would look at. I don't think they will. But I think you mentioned the names. And Cassell, for whatever reason, I don't know why he hasn't gotten a serious look. He's been an assistant for 15 years, was a very good player in the league, was a leader as a player, has worked for some top head coaches. I would think he would be a serious candidate. But if I had to, and this is just kind of speculation, but if I had to name who I think is probably a front runner looking at Trajan's history, I would say Borrego is I think the front runner. I think JB Bickerstaff did a really good job in Cleveland. I didn't think they needed to get rid of him. So he's somebody that they should look at. And then you mentioned, the other assistants, Micah Norrie obviously won a championship or was with Minnesota, I'm sorry. But was with Denver under Mike Malone and obviously got his, feet wet with some head coaching in the playoffs just because of the injuries, to the head coach. So it'll be interesting, but I would think Borrego is probably the front runner just because of his relationship with Trajan from New Orleans.
All right. First off, Chris, once again, thank you again. I'm going to get you out here on this one fun one. Been kind of a touchy subject here in Detroit. So we know the Detroit Pistons, they play at Little Caesars Arena. They're sharing an arena right now with the Detroit Red Wings. And we saw last year with the Detroit Lions, they put up a statue of Barry Sanders finally outside of Ford Field. One thing that's been talked about in this city is, when is Isiah Thomas going to get his statue of some sort, whether it's outside of LC or somewhere in Detroit? Do you think it's about time that Isiah gets that honor?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Isiah Thomas is an absolute legend. He's the best Piston ever. he put that franchise, I mentioned how good they had been. They hadn't been good before him. You know, he put them on the map.
Yeah.
He built that team. He's one of the greatest players ever. I think one of the 20 greatest players. I would maybe even say top 15 greatest players ever. I think he's the second greatest small player, just next to Steph Curry ever. Isiah would tell you I don't know if given truth serum, he would tell you he's the best. And I mean, Isiah in his argument, he beat Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and Michael Jordan. And he did not have the star-studded roster that Bird and Magic had, you know, and he was able to beat them. And they came darn close. Who knows how it would have played out had they won it in 1988, but they came darn close to winning 3 championships straight, you know. And so Isiah, I mean, he is Detroit Pistons basketball, so he definitely deserves a statue. And, you know, you want the players to get their statues, and he's still young, you know, so got a long way to go in life. But you want these players to get their statues when they can see them and appreciate them. I mean, Allen Iverson, the great Allen Iverson, he got his statue in Philadelphia already.
Yeah.
So how can Isiah Thomas not have a statue in Detroit? That's ridiculous.
There it is. Chris, just thank you again for speaking with me. Hopefully this is the first time of many. We'll be able to, you know, have this kind of chat. And again, thank you for taking your time to talk to me.
Yo, anytime, man. And Panu.
I do.